There's a very simple answer to that. The Bible did it. And it did it in two ways. First, by example. And apostolic example is something that lays an authoritative binding on the consciences of all Christians. So, it's done by example, and second, it's done didactically. By that I mean the teaching of it is laid down in Scripture. So let me deal with those. First of all, however, let me say that keeping the Sabbath day holy is one of the 10 commandments. I believe it goes back to the very creation. First day man had on earth was the Sabbath day. In other words, God's seventh day was really man's first, for man was created at the end of the sixth day. He was the last thing created. His first day on earth was the Sabbath day. I think it's a very, very audacious thing for any man, and I know many evangelicals do this, to excise one of the 10 commandments. The fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And I can find no justification for excising that from the Decalogue, the 10 commandments. So then your question, what right do we have to change it from the seventh day to the first? Well, let's look strictly at the wording of the commandment in Exodus chapter 20. The seventh day, it is not said the seventh day of the week. There were other Sabbaths, but the weekly Sabbath was a 7-day thing. As I said, man's Sabbath was his first day on the earth. And there is nothing that says we have got to keep to the seventh day of the week. Now, it is true the Jewish Sabbath was on the seventh day of the week. That was true right through to the formation of the New Testament church. But what happened in the New Testament? We come and follow the line carefully, and you'll have to study this carefully in the Scripture. Jesus was raised on the first day of the week. Pentecost occurred on the first day of the week. Paul went to Troas, a long trudge, to be with them for their services on the first day of the week. He wrote to the Corinthians regarding their church collections in their church services, and they were laying aside them on the first day of the week. Now let's stop there for a minute and ask, why on earth were Christians worshiping on the first day of the week? That was nobody else's holy day. Most of them were Jews at the beginning, and the Jewish holy day was the seventh day. Yet the Christians were observing the first day. Why? There has to be a reason. There's a change taking place here. It didn't all take place overnight. In other words, there wasn't a complete cessation of going to the synagogue on the seventh day, because they were there to witness for Christ and evangelize. But they still maintained the observance of the first day. And the Corinthian church especially were meeting, we are told, on the first day. The church in Troas, the first day, in Acts 20. There's an apostolic example that we have to follow. Now, why does that happen? Here's our right. In Hebrews chapter 4, there is a reference to God's rest. And throughout Hebrews 4, the word for rest, sometimes with a little prefix, sometimes without it, the word for rest is the word that gives us the English word pause. That's the usual word for rest. But in Hebrews 4 verse 9, we are told, there remaineth therefore. There is left over from that which has gone before. That's the force of the remaining. There remaineth therefore a what? A rest. But the Greek word is not the usual one here. It is sabbatismos. There is a keeping of the Sabbath. There remains from what has gone before a keeping of the Sabbath. This is a unique word, and we have got to give it its full force. Now, why does this keeping of the Sabbath come into the first day of the week then? Well, watch it very carefully in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 10. Here's the reason. For he that is entered into his rest, he also hath ceased from his own works as God did from his. Most people say, oh, that's a Christian entering into rest and he's given up his own works. Nonsense. A sinner giving up depending on his own works has no correlation to God finishing the work of creation. What Paul is saying here is, as God finished his creation and then instituted a Sabbath, there is another one who has finished his work and entered into his rest. And for that reason, there's left over a keeping of the Sabbath. Who is that one? It is Christ. Christ has entered into his rest, and he has instituted a Sabbath keeping that commemorates his finished work, his redemption work, just as the creation Sabbath celebrated God's creation work. God created the world in 6 days, and the seventh was the Sabbath. Jesus Christ finished his work. He was dead, he was buried, he rose on the first day of the week. And in commemoration of that, we keep the Sabbath. Not the creation Sabbath, not the multitude of Jewish Sabbaths in Colossians when he says the Sabbaths, notice the plural, the Sabbaths are abrogated. It's the Jewish Sabbaths. But the keeping of Sabbath in commemoration of the finished work of Christ remains according to Hebrews 4 verses 9 and 10. So why do we transfer Sabbath keeping to the first day? A, because of an apostolic example, and B, because according to Hebrews 4, it celebrates the finished work of our risen Christ.